I was just 7 years old when I first laid eyes on that peculiar silver bracelet, its surface etched with symbols that seemed to dance in the flickering candlelight of our small cabin in Tombstone, Arizona. My grandmother, Elena Morgenstern, had pressed it into my trembling palm with fingers weathered by decades of desert sun and hardship. Her voice, barely above a whisper, carried the weight of secrets that had haunted our family for generations. She spoke of ancient protections, of forces beyond our understanding, and of a destiny that would one day call upon me to make an impossible choice. The bracelet felt warm against my skin, almost alive, pulsing with an energy that made the hair on my arms stand on end. Little did I know that this seemingly ordinary piece of jewelry would become the key to unraveling a mystery that stretched back through time itself, connecting me to a young boy whose courage would save my life in ways I could never have imagined. The year was 1887, and the Arizona Territory was a place where legends were born and secrets were buried beneath the unforgiving desert sand. Thomas Whitmore was nothing more than a shadow against the adobe walls of the old mission when I first encountered him, 3 decades after my grandmother's death. I had returned to Tombstone as a grown man, a successful merchant from San Francisco, carrying with me the weight of unanswered questions and the silver bracelet that had never left my wrist. The town had changed dramatically since my childhood, transformed from a booming mining settlement into a quieter community where the echoes of gunfights and cattle drives seemed like distant memories. Yet something about the place still felt alive with possibilities, as if the very air held secrets waiting to be discovered. Thomas appeared to be no more than 12 years old, with sun-bleached hair and eyes that held an ancient wisdom that seemed impossible for someone so young. He wore simple clothing, the kind typical of frontier children, but there was something about his presence that commanded attention. When he approached me outside the old mercantile store on Allen Street, I felt an immediate recognition, as if I had been waiting my entire life for this moment. The boy's voice carried an odd formality as he spoke, his words carefully chosen and delivered with a confidence that belied his apparent age. He asked about the bracelet with a specificity that sent chills down my spine, describing details about the engravings that I had never shared with another living soul. His knowledge extended beyond mere observation, encompassing stories about the artifact's origins that my grandmother had taken to her grave. As Thomas spoke, I began to notice peculiarities about his appearance that defied easy explanation. His clothing, while appropriate for the era, showed no signs of wear despite the harsh conditions of frontier life. His skin bore no scars or blemishes that would typically mark a child who had spent his days working under the relentless desert sun. Most unsettling of all were his eyes, which seemed to hold depths of experience that no 12-year-old should possess. When I questioned him about his family and how he had come to know so much about my grandmother's bracelet, Thomas simply smiled and suggested that some knowledge transcends the boundaries of time itself. The first hook came when Thomas led me to the abandoned silver mine that had once made Tombstone famous, a place where fortunes had been won and lost in equal measure. The entrance, sealed for decades following a catastrophic collapse, somehow stood open before us, revealing passages that should have been blocked by tons of rock and debris. Thomas moved through the tunnels with the confidence of someone who had traversed these paths countless times, his small figure seeming to glow with an otherworldly light that illuminated our way. Deep within the mine, we discovered a chamber that defied all logic and reason, its walls covered with the same symbols that adorned my grandmother's bracelet. The air itself seemed charged with energy, creating an atmosphere that made my skin tingle and my heart race with anticipation. In the center of the chamber stood an altar of sorts, carved from black stone that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Upon this altar lay artifacts that belonged to no known civilization, items that seemed to pulse with life despite their apparent age. Thomas explained that this place served as a nexus, a point where different times and realities converged, allowing for possibilities that the human mind struggled to comprehend. As Thomas continued his explanation, the true nature of our situation began to reveal itself in ways that challenged everything I thought I knew about reality. The boy spoke of cycles that repeated across centuries, of guardians chosen to protect humanity from forces that sought to exploit the convergence points scattered throughout the American frontier. My grandmother, he revealed, had been one such guardian, and the bracelet had been passed down through generations of protectors who had sacrificed their normal lives to maintain the balance between worlds. The symbols etched into the silver were not merely decorative, but served as a key to unlock and control the energies that flowed through places like the chamber we now occupied. Thomas himself was not what he appeared to be, but rather a being whose existence spanned multiple timelines, appearing whenever the need for guidance arose. His youthful appearance was a constant, maintained across decades as he moved between different points in history, always arriving at the precise moment when his knowledge and abilities were most desperately needed. The revelation struck me like a physical blow, forcing me to reconsider everything I thought I understood about my family's history and my own place in the world. Thomas explained that my return to Tombstone had not been driven by nostalgia or business opportunities, but by the same forces that had called every guardian before me. The bracelet had been drawing me back, responding to a growing threat that required immediate attention. Somewhere in the desert surrounding our small town, an expedition led by a wealthy industrialist named Cornelius Blackwood had discovered another convergence point, one far more powerful and dangerous than the chamber we currently occupied. Blackwood, driven by greed and an insatiable hunger for power, sought to harness these otherworldly energies for personal gain, unaware that his actions could tear apart the very fabric of reality itself. The consequences of his meddling would extend far beyond the Arizona territory, potentially affecting the course of human history in ways that could never be undone. Thomas guided me through the complex history of the convergence points, explaining how they had shaped the development of the American West in subtle but significant ways. The California Gold Rush, he revealed, had been triggered by energies leaking from one such site near Sacramento, drawing thousands of prospectors to a region that might otherwise have remained sparsely populated for decades longer. The famous shootout at the OK Corral here in Tombstone had occurred near another convergence point, the otherworldly energies influencing the participants in ways that had escalated a simple dispute into a legendary gunfight that would be remembered for generations. Throughout the frontier period, guardians like my grandmother had worked tirelessly to monitor these sites, ensuring that their power remained contained and hidden from those who would abuse it. The railroad barons, cattle kings, and mining magnates who had shaped the West often found their greatest successes and most devastating failures linked to their proximity to these mysterious locations, though none understood the true source of their changing fortunes. The weight of this legacy pressed down upon me as Thomas continued his explanation, revealing that my comfortable life as a San Francisco merchant had been built upon a foundation of lies and half-truths designed to keep me safe until the time came for me to fulfill my destiny. My parents had died not in a wagon accident as I had been told, but while attempting to seal a convergence point that had been discovered by a group of treasure hunters near Phoenix. Their sacrifice had bought precious time, allowing my grandmother to complete the protective rituals that kept the site dormant, but at a cost that had haunted her for the remainder of her life. She had hoped that the responsibility might pass to another family line, that I might be allowed to live a normal life free from the burden of guardianship, but the bracelet had chosen me regardless of her wishes or my own desires. Now, with Blackwood's expedition threatening to unleash forces beyond human comprehension, there was no choice but to embrace the role that had been waiting for me since birth. The second hook arrived when Thomas led me out of the mine and into the desert night, where the distant glow of campfires revealed the location of Blackwood's excavation site. Through a spyglass that Thomas produced from seemingly nowhere, I could observe the industrialist's operation in shocking detail. Dozens of workers labored around the clock, their efforts directed by strange machines that seemed far too advanced for the 1880s. The excavation itself had revealed structures that clearly predated any known civilization, their architecture incorporating geometries that hurt to look upon directly. Most disturbing of all was Blackwood himself, a tall figure whose movements seemed somehow wrong, as if he were a marionette being controlled by invisible strings. As I watched, he performed rituals that bore no resemblance to any earthly religion, his actions causing the very air above the dig site to shimmer and warp like heat mirages. Thomas explained that Blackwood had already been touched by the otherworldly forces he sought to control, his human consciousness slowly being replaced by something far older and infinitely more malevolent. The true horror of the situation became clear as Thomas revealed the timeline we faced, measured not in days or weeks but in hours before Blackwood's activities reached a critical threshold. The convergence point beneath his excavation site was among the most powerful on the continent, connected to similar locations across the world through a network of energy that spanned the globe. If Blackwood succeeded in fully activating this site, the resulting cascade effect would awaken every convergence point simultaneously, tearing holes in reality that would allow entities from other dimensions to pour through into our world. These beings had been waiting for millennia for such an opportunity, patient predators whose very existence was antithetical to human life. They would not come as conquerors seeking to rule over mankind, but as destroyers whose presence would fundamentally alter the nature of reality itself, transforming our world into something unrecognizable and utterly hostile to human existence. Thomas handed me a second artifact, a compass whose needle pointed not to magnetic north, but toward the nearest source of convergence energy, its brass surface engraved with symbols that matched those on my bracelet. He explained that this device would allow me to navigate the complex network of tunnels that connected the various sites, ancient pathways that had been carved by the same unknown civilization that had built the chambers we had discovered. These tunnels stretched for hundreds of miles beneath the Arizona desert, forming a web of interconnected passages that could allow someone to travel vast distances in remarkably short periods of time. However, the journey would not be without its dangers, as the tunnels were protected by guardians of their own, entities that existed to prevent unauthorized access to the convergence network. These protectors had been dormant for decades, but Blackwood's activities were stirring them to wakefulness, making any attempt to use the tunnel system increasingly perilous with each passing hour. The plan that Thomas outlined was both simple in concept and terrifying in its implications, requiring me to travel through the tunnel network to reach Blackwood's excavation site before his ritual reached completion. Once there, I would need to use the combined power of my bracelet and the compass to perform a counter-ritual that would not only stop Blackwood's work but permanently seal the convergence point he had discovered. The process would require a sacrifice, though Thomas was deliberately vague about the exact nature of what would be demanded of me. He assured me that the alternative, allowing Blackwood to succeed in his goals, would result in consequences that made any personal sacrifice seem insignificant by comparison. The fate of not just Tombstone or Arizona, but potentially the entire world, rested on my willingness to embrace a destiny I had never wanted and face dangers I could barely comprehend. As we prepared to enter the tunnel system, Thomas shared the final piece of the puzzle that had been hidden from me throughout my life, a revelation that recontextualized everything I thought I knew about my family's history and my own identity. My grandmother Elena had not simply been a guardian who protected convergence points from exploitation, but was herself descended from the ancient civilization that had originally built these sites. The symbols on the bracelet were not just protective charms, but a form of genetic key that could only be activated by someone carrying the proper bloodline. This heritage explained my ability to sense the otherworldly energies, my unconscious attraction to certain locations, and the dreams that had plagued me since childhood, visions of places and events that seemed to exist outside of normal time and space. Thomas himself was connected to this same lineage, though his relationship to the ancient builders was far more direct and complex than anything I could claim. The tunnel entrance was concealed behind a natural rock formation that would have been impossible to find without Thomas's guidance, its opening protected by wards that would have killed any unauthorized person who attempted to pass through them. As my bracelet made contact with the threshold, the barriers recognized my heritage and allowed us to proceed into passages that stretched away into darkness beyond the reach of any conventional light source. The walls around us pulsed with a faint luminescence that seemed to respond to our presence, creating patterns that shifted and flowed like living things. The air itself felt thick with possibility, charged with energies that made every breath taste of copper and ozone. Thomas moved ahead of me with the confidence of long familiarity, his small form casting shadows that seemed far larger and more complex than should have been possible given our modest light source. Our journey through the tunnels revealed the true scope of the civilization that had once thrived in this region, evidence of a culture that had possessed knowledge and capabilities that far exceeded anything achieved by modern society. The passages were not crude excavations but carefully engineered constructions, their surfaces smooth as glass and curved in ways that suggested an understanding of physics and mathematics that would not be rediscovered for centuries. Along the walls, we encountered chambers filled with artifacts whose purposes remained mysterious, devices that hummed with contained energy and sculptures that seemed to shift and change when observed from different angles. Thomas explained that these were not merely historical remnants but active components of a vast machine designed to monitor and regulate the flow of otherworldly energies throughout the region. The builders had not simply discovered the convergence points but had enhanced and modified them, creating a network that served purposes beyond human understanding. The first sign that we were approaching Blackwood's excavation came in the form of vibrations that traveled through the tunnel walls, rhythmic pulses that seemed to sync with my heartbeat and made the bracelet on my wrist grow warm against my skin. Thomas's expression grew increasingly grave as we drew closer to our destination, his youthful features taking on aspects that seemed far older and more weathered than his apparent age should allow. He began to change before my eyes, his form becoming less solid and more translucent, as if he were fading from reality itself. When I questioned this transformation, he explained that maintaining physical form in our world required considerable energy, resources that he needed to conserve for the trials that lay ahead. His true nature was becoming more apparent with each step we took, revealing him to be something far removed from humanity despite his familiar appearance. The tunnel system delivered us to a chamber directly beneath Blackwood's excavation, where the sounds of digging and machinery filtered down through layers of rock and soil. Thomas pointed to a shaft that led upward toward the surface, its walls scarred by recent construction work that had broken through from above. Through this opening came not only sound but light, the strange illumination that I had observed through the spyglass now revealing itself to be far more intense and unnatural when experienced at close range. The very air shimmered with energy that made my vision blur and my teeth ache, while the bracelet on my wrist had grown so warm that it was almost painful to bear. Thomas warned me that the effects would only intensify as we drew closer to the convergence point, and that I needed to prepare myself for sensations and experiences that would challenge the limits of human perception and endurance. As we emerged from the shaft into Blackwood's excavation site, the full horror of what the industrialist had unleashed became immediately apparent in ways that no amount of description could have prepared me for. The workers I had observed from a distance were revealed to be something far more disturbing than mere laborers, their movements mechanical and their eyes reflecting light in ways that suggested they were no longer entirely human. They continued their tasks with single-minded determination, seemingly unaware of our presence despite the fact that we stood directly in their path. Their tools had carved away layers of earth and rock to reveal structures that defied architectural logic, buildings that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, and whose surfaces displayed patterns that shifted and evolved even as I watched. At the center of this impossible construction stood Blackwood himself, his body wreathed in energies that made the air around him dance and twist like heated air above a forge. The industrialist had become something monstrous in his pursuit of power, his human form stretched and distorted by the forces he sought to control. His skin had taken on a translucent quality that revealed networks of energy flowing beneath the surface, while his eyes burned with a light that seemed to come from somewhere far removed from our world. When he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that human vocal cords could never produce, creating sounds that bypassed the ears entirely and resonated directly within the mind. He was performing a ritual that combined elements from various traditions, mixing symbols and phrases from cultures separated by thousands of years and vast distances. Thomas explained that this eclecticism was not random but carefully calculated, as the convergence points responded to certain universal principles that transcended individual belief systems or historical periods. The revelation of Blackwood's true plan came not through Thomas's explanation but through direct observation of the ritual's effects on the surrounding environment, changes that were becoming more dramatic and widespread with each passing moment. The excavation site was expanding outward in all directions, not through additional digging but through a fundamental alteration of space itself that was causing reality to stretch and warp around the convergence point. Buildings in the distance appeared to be moving closer even though they remained rooted in their original locations, while the night sky above us displayed constellations that belonged to no earthly heaven. Most disturbing of all were the glimpses of other places that began to appear at the edges of my vision, landscapes and structures that existed somewhere else entirely but were slowly bleeding through into our world. Thomas pointed out that these overlapping realities were not random but represented specific locations that Blackwood intended to merge with our own, creating a hybrid world where he could rule as an absolute monarch over human and non-human subjects alike. The complexity of stopping Blackwood's ritual became apparent as Thomas guided me through the maze of excavated passages toward the heart of the convergence point, where the industrialist had positioned himself for the final phase of his work. The counter-ritual that would seal the site required precise positioning at specific locations throughout the excavation, each one corresponding to a particular aspect of the otherworldly energies that were being manipulated. My bracelet would serve as a focus for these energies, but only if I could maintain my concentration and humanity while being exposed to forces that were actively trying to transform me into something else entirely. Thomas warned me that the convergence point would attempt to seduce me with visions of power and knowledge, offering me the same temptations that had originally corrupted Blackwood and turned him into the monster he had become. The first position required me to stand within a circle of symbols that had been carved directly into the bedrock, ancient markings that predated human civilization but somehow felt familiar despite their alien origin. As I took my place within the circle, the bracelet on my wrist began to resonate with the energies flowing through the convergence point, creating harmonies that I could feel in my bones and muscles. The sensation was not entirely unpleasant, carrying with it hints of vast knowledge and capabilities that were almost within my grasp. I could sense the history of the entire region stretching back through geological ages, could perceive the slow movements of continents and the rise and fall of countless civilizations that had discovered and used these same energies for purposes both magnificent and terrible. The temptation to simply remain in this state of expanded awareness was almost overwhelming, offering an escape from the responsibilities and limitations of ordinary human existence. Thomas's voice cut through the hypnotic effects of the convergence point, reminding me of the stakes involved and the consequences of failure that would extend far beyond my own fate. He guided me through the first phase of the counter-ritual, a series of words and gestures that felt both natural and alien as they flowed from my lips and hands. The bracelet grew brighter with each syllable, its light expanding outward to create patterns that intersected with the symbols carved into the bedrock. I could feel the energies of the convergence point responding to my actions, their chaotic flow beginning to organize into more stable configurations that would eventually allow for the permanent sealing that was our ultimate goal. However, this process also attracted the attention of Blackwood himself, whose inhuman senses detected the interference and began directing his transformed workers toward my location with murderous intent. The creatures that had once been human workers moved with inhuman speed and coordination, their modified bodies allowing them to traverse the excavation site with an efficiency that would have been impossible for ordinary people. Thomas stepped forward to intercept them, his form finally revealing its true nature as something that existed partially outside of normal reality. He became a figure of living light and shadow, wielding energies that matched and countered those being directed by Blackwood's servants. The battle that ensued was unlike anything that could be described in conventional terms, involving forces and capabilities that transcended physical combat entirely. Thomas fought not just to protect me, but to maintain the integrity of reality itself, preventing the convergence point from completing its transformation of the excavation site into something that would serve as a permanent gateway for otherworldly entities. While Thomas held off the transformed workers, I moved to the second position required for the counter-ritual, a location that placed me uncomfortably close to where Blackwood continued his own work with increasing desperation. The industrialist had apparently realized that his plans were being threatened and was attempting to accelerate his ritual even at the cost of stability and safety. The air around him crackled with barely contained energies that were beginning to tear holes in the fabric of space itself, creating windows that looked out onto landscapes that belonged to other worlds entirely. Through these apertures came sounds and smells that belonged to no earthly environment, while shapes moved in the distance that suggested the presence of entities waiting for the opportunity to cross over into our reality. The second phase of the counter-ritual required me to confront the full force of the convergence point's attempt to transform me into something more suited to its purposes, a process that began as whispers in my mind offering knowledge and power beyond human comprehension. The voices spoke of civilizations that spanned galaxies, of technologies that could reshape matter and energy at will, of lifespans measured in millennia rather than decades. They showed me visions of what I could become if I simply stopped resisting and allowed the transformation to proceed, possibilities that included not just personal aggrandizement but the ability to guide humanity into a golden age of unprecedented achievement and prosperity. The temptation was so intense that for a moment I almost abandoned the counter-ritual entirely, my hand hesitating over the bracelet as I considered the alternatives to the sacrifice that Thomas had warned me would be required. The turning point came when I witnessed the true nature of what Blackwood had become and understood that the promises being whispered in my mind were lies designed to create another servant of the otherworldly entities that sought to invade our world. The industrialist's transformation had not granted him power or knowledge, but had instead made him into a puppet whose every action served purposes that he no longer understood or controlled. His human consciousness had been replaced by something alien and malevolent, a parasite that used his body and memories as a vehicle for its own agenda. The workers who served him were not enhanced humans but empty shells animated by fragments of the same parasitic intelligence, drones whose only purpose was to facilitate the completion of a ritual that would result in their own destruction along with that of every other living thing on Earth. In the years that followed, I maintained my outward life as a successful merchant while secretly monitoring the network of convergence points that Thomas had revealed to me, using the compass and bracelet to detect and prevent other attempts to exploit these dangerous sites. I never again encountered anything on the scale of Blackwood's ritual, but smaller incidents occurred regularly enough to keep me busy traveling throughout the American West under various pretexts related to my business interests. The guardianship proved to be a solitary calling, requiring secrecy that prevented me from sharing the burden with family or close friends, but also providing a sense of purpose that made every sacrifice worthwhile. I eventually discovered others like myself, descendants of the ancient builders who had inherited similar responsibilities, and together we formed an informal network that continues to this day protecting humanity from threats that exist beyond the boundaries of conventional understanding. The little boy who had saved my life by guiding me through the most important night of my existence was never seen again in Tombstone or anywhere else in the territory, but I sometimes catch glimpses of familiar figures in other places where convergence points require attention. The guardianship is passed down not through bloodlines alone, but through a combination of heritage and character that manifests when the need is greatest, ensuring that there will always be someone ready to stand against the forces that would transform our world into something unrecognizable. The bracelet remains my constant companion, its weight a reminder of the choice I made, and the price that vigilance demands from those who would protect the innocent from dangers they must never know exist.